All right, welcome everybody to another Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Blazer, and we have another discussion lined up today. My guests tonight are from the company Dread XP, who over the course of last year have been putting out and organizing indie horror compilations under the Dread X collection. And they're both on tonight to talk a little bit about horror design as well as organizing and getting this whole thing going. So, please welcome to the cast, Ted and Star. How are you both doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Wonderful.
It's great to have both of you on. I know we're kind of pressed for time, but we're going to see what we can get done in the next hour. But it's definitely a pleasure to have you both on. As I was just telling Ted and Star before, I found out about this when Star tweeted about the Dread X2 or Dread X Collection 2 about I think it was early mid 2020. And since then, I've been keeping an eye on the series and really enjoying it. So, thank you again for that key, and thank you both for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
Don't worry, Pony, there won't be any jump scares in this cast. At least I don't think so.
That would be amazing, though. We'd appreciate it.
But
Appreciate it.
we certainly have a lot to discuss tonight. We'll see what we can get through. So, as always for these casts, since this is both of your first times on, could you talk a little bit about your backgrounds and what is Dread XP for people who are wondering?
Ted should definitely go first.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
My name's Ted Henschke. I'm the head of productions for Dread XP. Dread XP is a bit of a chimera of entities here. We originally started off as like a gaming news and content creation site that was an offshoot of another horror website called Dread Central. When we started Dread XP as a way to try to give the same kind of coverage that Dread Central was giving to film, and to be allowed to have the same amount of front page bandwidth and mental bandwidth to just focus on games. We are owned by Epic Pictures Group, which is a film production company. So our partner in all of this is a guy named Patrick Ewald. He runs Epic Pictures. And essentially, Epic Pictures has been putting out horror movies for a long time now. It's like over 10 years, that they've kind of been doing this stuff. Basically what happened was when COVID hit, we were looking to basically find something that was projects to do that would be feasible to do in the meantime, because you can't shoot movies during COVID. I've been wanting to try to start something like this with indie game publication for a long time, because the market is pretty underserved when it comes to a certain budget bracket of indie games. And so basically we were on a business call asking, anyone had any ideas for what to do for projects for the foreseeable future. And that's where the idea for the first Dread X collection came along. I basically wanted to try to take, I was at the time doing a lot of coverage on itch.io indie horror games. So this is back in 2020 around March. This was right after PAX East. So aside from the big PAX coverage, there's not a lot of announcements that come out for horror stuff in the early part of the year. So a lot of times you fill the calendar by looking at stuff on itch, which there's a lot of really wonderful stuff on itch. So if any of the people out there aren't itch connoisseurs, you should definitely check it out. And so basically what I wanted to do was take that, some of these really awesome titles I was seeing there that were getting a lot of exposure, and try to create something like that, but packaged in such a way that would be both viable to the consumer as a dollar amount, but also something for the devs, because a lot of people were out of work at the time. So it was like, how do we get people paid? But yeah, so basically that's kind of where Dread XP comes from. Since then, the collections have been thankfully successful enough that we've been able to continue and move on to bigger game publication. So for my part, I've had to step away from the journalism side of things. I'm going to be shooting videos and stuff, but it's like a relatively bad look for the producer at one company to be reviewing someone else's games, So I had to take a step away from that. It was part of a larger move that we had at Dread XP This will get into when Star was brought on and a lot of our figuring out of the company ethos and stuff, which she's contributed a hell of a lot to all of that. And so I don't want to talk too much about the positively spooky angle because I'm sure that she's going to want to go into that. But positively spooky is something that we have striven to maintain across all of our brands. So on the website, we have we cover things in a positive light. So even if we don't like something, we're always looking for the positives or suggestions on how to improve. And with the games, we're looking to promote positive creators. Even in the horror space, people are often surprised that there's so much want for positivity within the horror space, especially as an outsider. You look in, you're like, oh, those are the scary people that like blood and guts and stuff. Not always the case. I mean, there's just as many horror accounts that like pictures of rats or cats or things like that. So, that's, and it is a longer answer than probably you were expecting because it is a kind of an interesting tale of how we got here. But mostly now, for my part at least, I just focus on the game production and the collections and things like that. We have a wonderful managing editor of the website named Sam Guglielmo, who does a really good job at running things over there. We've got some really great content up over there, so if anyone's interested in indie horror stuff, I would definitely recommend checking that out. It's also where you can find the press kits for our games, so getting my quick pitch out of the way at the beginning so that I don't have to cram it all in at the end. But yeah, that's, like I said, I was a journalist before this, got into production, kind of not like ignorant to production. I was familiar with it, but there's a lot of learning that comes from actually doing. So it's been a great learning experience for us. For me specifically, I mean, Star has way more experience in the industry than I do, but it's been going really well. So yeah, that's me.
All right, Star, go right ahead.
I also want to mention, first of all, Ted is a really good writer. He's the one who writes all the collections, so he does a lot of QA. We both do project management, small company. We do everything. Also want to shout out Patrick Ewald because we wouldn't exist without him, and he's like super supportive of our studio, and he's always really excited about what we do. So
yeah, we really lucked out with that. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
We did. Yeah, Patrick is amazing. So I'm Starlight Skies. I've been in the industry for a decade, and I started off doing 3D environmental art. I went to art school, but then I became like a leader at a local game dev, and then I realized like there's nobody doing marketing. So I started doing marketing and community, and so that's what took me to here. I got hired literally the day the first collection came out, so I didn't have any chance to do really anything for that, except for afterwards. But I looked at this Twitter, I looked at the games. I didn't even know what the games were, obviously. I looked at games and I was like, yeah, I can work with this. And they specifically asked me to make a positive horror community. And I think that we have succeeded at that. Also, one of the first things I did was create branding for the company because we have all of these different games. I have all these different kinds of art styles and developers. And so I wanted to have like something that like overarched like what we were as a company. And I gave a bunch of options during this branding meeting, and Ted came up with Positively Spooky, which we're both like, yeah, that works. Like that's what we are. That's a good way to describe us. Is it okay if I also take this opportunity to talk about like a couple of misconceptions about Dread?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First of all, the number one misconception is that we are not a game jam. The Haunted PS1 community, they do game jams. Which is like you just make a game in a short time. It can be whatever. It's great. We do like curated short games. So we like provide QA and marketing to all of the games, and we pay the developers. So they're definitely curated short games, not game jams.
Okay.
So there's like a level of stakes there. Yeah, a quality thing we like. And then also, like, if you want to join, this is the second question we get all the time. If you want to join a collection, like, you have to already have something like polished on like Steam or Itch already. Like Ted's the one who selects them, and he looks through. He knows about the horror community and what games are out there even before Dread XP. Like, he already kind of knew who he wanted to bring on, and so you need to have that certain level of quality. So also we have so many people that want to work with us, including past developers that want to work with us, that it's we have to raise our if that makes sense, our standards of like who we bring into the collection now, because we're getting more attention at this point. So yeah, that's the two things I wanted to address.
All right. Yeah, and definitely a lot to kind of talk about here when it comes to indie horror. Like you said, Ted, that a lot of the games that a lot of ones that we've been discussing and looking at have been like relatively small games. You know, itch. I know you mentioned Haunted PS1. There's a little shout out to it as well in chat, and that was one that I just played about 2 weeks ago. I played both the 2020 and 2021 collections, and my voice is already dying when I even start. That's not a good sign. But when it comes to kind of, and as you said, Sar, about kind of like curating and, making sure there's a level of quality when it comes to these indie horror games, I think that's a very interesting point. Because for a lot of people, I think a lot of general consumers, when they look at kind of indie horror over the last 10 years, probably their minds go to, Five Nights at Freddy's, Outlast, or Amnesia, and they really don't know about a lot of the smaller developers. And I guess, could either of you kind of talk or elaborate a little bit more about kind of like, what does the indie horror scene look like today for people looking in from the outside?
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you want to tackle it, or do you want me to go?
I don't know. Both of us could give good answers, but in different ways.
Yeah, you go first.
Do I hear something in the background, or is that just me?
Is it my fan? I can turn my fan off.
Oh, okay. No.
Hopefully it's not my own jump scare.
What does it sound like?
News. I hear
it sounds like
right
news?
Now. Yeah. Okay.
No, that's not me. I can't hear it. Maybe
I closed out the stream. It was coming from the stream.
Oh, okay. Cool. Figured it out.
Yeah. All right, so indie horror sphere. Okay, so to me, me working in the industry, I've worked with a lot of indies. As somebody who does marketing, I focus on trends and like what is popular, because that's how we decide the games that we eventually like publish and help develop. Like, for example, survival horror games are really popular, and now they continue to exist through multiplayer games, but not necessarily like single player experiences like they used to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then also like there is like obviously gore and that sort of thing. There is an audience for that, but like we actually try to do a more, I guess, like teenage version of horror, like what we saw from like Nickelodeon and Goosebumps and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Like we actually focus on that kind of horror because we think that like reaches a bigger audience. So we're okay if we're like an entry point. Our games are like an entry point to horror to people, because we don't feel like anyone else is like really touching on that right now. So like that's what I was thinking about while doing branding. So for me, the indie horror sphere is different because it's the most experimental genre that there is, because it can have a lot of surrealism and it can have a lot of like expressed emotions, and it's very raw. And it's also great because a lot of content creators like jump right into horror games. With something like League of Legends, you have to spend many hours learning the rules, getting good at it in order, to be decent. Horror games, you just jump in, you just play it. It's very narrative. And so, we know the tropes, so it's just easier for content. So for those reasons is like why I wanted to join DreadXP, because I thought it'd be great. The downside, though, to horror, as somebody who studies the industry, is that it's not as widely recognized, just like with movies. Like, look at the movie Get Out, was a masterpiece. We all know that. And it should get more awards for what it was. But horror movies are just not as seen as the same as like drama movies or thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with games. Like games and the bigger industry, like horror is not seen as the same level as some other genres. So the good sides and downsides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, I mean, horror in general is always a genre that has its roots in indie, in my opinion. Like there's so many successful horror franchises that have come from the indie sphere. Like the 8 Pages of Slender, The Arrival now. That was, originally just like one dude's indie game. Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott Cawthon's like 74th game before he made Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm not exaggerating. It's either 73rd or 74th. I haven't looked recently. Bendy and the Ink Machine, pretty small team on that as well. There's a lot of like space in the indie area for horror, and it's easy to forget that like a lot of these, what we consider to be like tentpole franchises of horror, started as indie. And that goes over for film as well. Night of the Living Dead, George Romero shot it in black and white, not for stylistic choices, because the film was cheaper. Halloween the original Halloween was so low in action because John Carpenter was like, I don't know, can I make a movie for like no money? And it's so there's like a lot of that's in my opinion, that's where like horror has its roots, is in that like level of indie. And I think that it's attractive to indie creators, myself included, because like horror is the genre that, well, I wouldn't say it's most based on like the emotive qualities, because there's a number of like great romantic visual novels and things like that that are also like very emotive. But to make a good horror game doesn't require $10 million, the best graphics ever. It just requires a good idea in a confined area, good sound design, some unique look to it. But you can make up for a lot of the budget through the overwhelming sense of dread that you can build through the mechanics or through the atmosphere, the ambiance, the environment. So that's the thing is about indie horror fans, is that they tend to be ravenous consumers of indie horror. Like, I know plenty of people that play several indie horror games a day, like just because they love it. I mean, me personally, like I know that I watch probably at least one movie every day, horror movie. Like I'm just as ravenous of a horror consumer. Like we do movie nights on the weekends at Dread XP, and we'll knock through 9 to 12 found footage movies every weekend, and then I on my own will then go and watch a couple movies during the week. So that's the market, really, is that like. But what Star was saying about the gateway, the kind of the Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark style horror, that gateway horror. That's one of the things that I think that we've provided to are continuing to try to provide to a larger audience. And I think that's, if you look at a lot of the successful indie games, Five Nights at Freddy's, Bendy and the Ink Machine, Slender, they all have that kind of like PG-13 aspect to them. So it's not like me personally, I'll watch the goriest movies in the world. Like I'll play the goriest games in the world. It doesn't bother me. But as a company, our ethos has been more along the lines of, let's create that kind of like gateway horror content that doesn't overly rely on the shock value. And I mean, like if you played the newest Dread X collection, there's blood, there's death and stuff in that. There's one of the games has like implied dead kid in it. So it's like there's it's not like we aren't capable of touching on harder subjects, but oftentimes we find that other horror games tend to get overshadowed in their like subject matter by the intensity of the content. Not always. I mean, there's some really great horror films out there that are super intense. But yeah. Anyways, once again, a long rambling answer from me, but I hope that kind of answered the question there.
Yeah. And again, there's certainly a lot we can discuss here. And if anyone has any questions for Ted and Star for the chat, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we'll try and get to them as they show. But like kind of building off what both of you were saying, what Star was saying earlier about kind of the motto of positively spooky, that when it comes to like horror, I think
positively spooky.
Positively, sorry about that.
Yeah, positively as in like it's positively spooky, like as being positive, and also it's very spooky.
All right, but kind of like building off of that, like as you're saying, like horror can mean a lot of things to different people, and one of the aspects I think is very interesting is that horror, and something I talk about in my fourth book, is that it's more of a thematic genre rather than mechanical. As both of you said, like you can put horror to anything. I mean, as you said, both of you, and I'm sure your community plays a lot of horror games, and there are so many different topics and settings for it. And what I think is very interesting is about kind of like, as you said, that line between, horror being more like about like the dread and, like atmosphere and kind of making someone feel very tense. And as you said, the over the top, we're talking super R-rated, blood, guts, gore, that kind of thing. And what I wanted to ask both of you about is when it comes to, I guess, like the horror like that you use for the Drax collection. And again, as you're trying to aim for like, I guess like the teen level or again entry level horror, I think maybe a better fit for it. What do you think like attracts people to horror along those lines, as opposed to say again like the hard, heavy gore? Because I know there are a lot of people in my audience who they can't watch gore. Like if I play a horror game that has anything, over the top, like even something like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, is too much for them. And again, I think it's very interesting about that very wide spectrum when it comes to horror design.
Yeah. Do you mind if I go first?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. You have a good point about like the way that like horror is a thematic genre rather than a mechanical one. Like you can have horror shooters, you can have horror visual novels, etc. And so like it's in a weird spot because like even on Steam, like you can't list your game as horror. It's like, what is your mechanical genre? Are you an action game? Are you an RPG? Yeah. Are you an adventure game? It's like, I don't know, none of them. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's so horror is like, it's weird because like you can find people that are horror fans from a number of different like mechanical genres. And what draws people to horror? I mean, that's a big question, but like like you were saying, some people like certain kinds of horror, don't like others. I had this game I used to play with people where it was like whenever anyone said that they don't like horror, I would say, yeah, but what's your but? Like everyone has that but. They're like, I don't like horror, but I did like this. I don't like horror, but I did like The Thing, or I don't like horror, but I did like Hereditary, or I don't like horror, but I did like the Scream movies. So like there's usually something within there that's like more telling as to like what they're looking for as an audience member. So with Scream, it'd be something that's more comedic, but also maybe like a little bit like teen and edgy. With The Thing, it's like maybe they're just looking for like really dope monster effects. Like, so there's usually those like edge cases of things that they like, or even something like Jurassic Park, which I would consider horror. But that's the funny thing is now we're getting into the topic of when people try to disassociate things from horror because I don't want to be known as horror. Like you watch the original Jurassic Park, it's definitely a horror movie. I don't understand
the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. Metal Gear Solid has horror in it.
Yeah. Or
Last of Us is horror.
There's some people that say that Predator is an action movie. It's not a horror movie. It's like it's a slasher movie. Like what are you talking about? Like
yeah.
There's a lot of like the weird tendency to disassociate your game from horror, but there's also on the flip side, a lot of times horror fans will try to say, what is horror adjacent? What are edge cases of horror? And I think that's fun. It's a fun little like thing to do. But in terms of what actually draws people to horror, I'm always hesitant to like explain other people's interests. I don't want to like come off as like I know exactly what they're looking for. Me personally, I find it's the genre that's the easiest to play with, difficult to tell stories. It's really easy to get yourself into that like really deep mindset. When the laws, when you're placed into a persistent danger of which you're not entirely sure what it is, it activates your brain in like a different way to make you start thinking about paying attention to your surroundings and things like that. So, I'll play through a Call of Duty game and I'll breeze through the campaign and I'll just like shoot all the bad guys, pick up some lore, whatever. But if I'm playing like Resident Evil or Silent Hill or a horror game or something like, any of those horror games, I'll like pay a lot more attention to the environment and like what's going on because I want to absorb the story. And I think that's what a lot of people are interested in horror. And then there's also a lot of people that are just interested in like watching things explode. And that's totally fine. Like, but with the stories that we're trying to tell with the Dread X collection, with the audience that we're trying to reach, we're more trying to reach people that are interested in those experimental, interesting mechanics that are a little bit more polished than you'd expect from a product of this budget and development cycle. And so I feel like the interesting story kind of is baked into that. So as Star mentioned, I do write the story for the collections. And so, it's difficult because, you got to weigh what you do tell the player to get them interested versus what information you're withholding to keep them enthralled, which is a very unique element of horror, I believe. You don't really find that in a lot of other genres, is that the story of what's not being told, and so when we're creating the horror and what's going to compel people, we're usually looking for something that's a little bit more complicated, a little bit deeper, something that there's stuff for the player to dive into and find more out about the world. We especially did that a lot in the first collection. but also trying to ground it in a real human story, which is I feel like what we tried to do in the third game, and to a much greater extent in the fourth game. So the hunt being the fourth game. And with the third collection, I wanted to try to explore the story between those two characters, but it was a little bit overwritten. But with the fourth game, we really tried to hone in on that like human story within this much larger world. So, yeah.
We have some questions.
Oh yeah, we definitely do. I was just waiting. Do you have anything you want to add to that, so before you get to the questions?
I forgot what the original question was.
I think kind of like viewing horror from different aspects, whether it's from the overly gore side or, the tense, thematic atmospheric side.
Well, it's funny because people are like, oh, shooters, because they're thinking of Resident Evil, but a ton of other horror games that were really popular, like Outlast and Amnesia and Silent Hill, were not shooters. And like me personally, I'm not a big gun shooter person, so for me, I'm not as interested in that, personally, as like some other people are. But that's like, it's absolutely true that you can put anything onto horror, like dinosaurs
Mm-hmm.
can be horror, or clowns, or anything. And I think it's really fun to explore that, because there's so many channels on YouTube that talk about horror movies and horror games, and they want to dissect the psychology of that. And the more people like unbox like Five Nights at Freddy's, which is also not a shooter, people realize the depth that horror can go into. And I think it just makes making horror games like a lot more interesting. And and about like the entry level, I know we keep bringing this up, but like that really does differentiate ourselves from other developers, like let's say Puppet Combo or Night Dive Studios. I think they did System Shock, right?
I think they are doing System Shock right now.
They're doing System Shock now, but they've done a number of remasters like Shadow Man and stuff like that.
Yeah. So like they are definitely going for like the classic horror fan. But like we feel like there's definitely this like audience that wants to go back to their like childhood of Courage the Cowardly Dog and scary stories to tell in the dark. I see like Twitter threads about those books and that artwork, and how much they have like a nostalgia for that. Movies in the 90s and 80s that weren't necessarily scary, but maybe more funny to people nowadays. That was like a fun childhood memory. So like that's what the kind of like I guess emotions, nostalgia that we're trying to evoke with our upcoming games. Like, for example, Spookware. Did you play Spookware from our third collection?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So we're taking Nintendo WarioWare and we're adding like horror elements to it, but it's not necessarily scary, because the mechanics, the gameplay just doesn't set itself up for a classic horror game, but it's still like that kind of experience. And that's the perfect example of something that they could be like a good introductory point to horror, because it's hard. I tell my friends, I'm like, oh, I just made this new game, and they immediately say, oh, I'm such a wimp, I'm such a baby, I can't play horror games. But I'm like, you can play ours.
Yeah, see, that's actually something I meant to say earlier in my point. There's a difference between a game being dark and a game being like disgusting. And like what you're talking about with horror, with it being like a thematic genre, is like there's different styles of horror based on like the emotive element that it's like trying to like push you on. So like, there's always going to be like phobia horror, like clowns or spiders, whatever. Like I'm not scared of spiders, so whenever I see spiders in a game, I'm like, whatever. But like I have a lot of friends that are like, I can't play games with spiders in them. And is that horror? It's like, yeah, it is, if that's what you're going for, is to try to scare people that are afraid of spiders. But and then there's the horror of darker themes, and then there's the horror of things being just like blood everywhere and disgusting. There's body horror. So there's a bunch of different styles of horror. So to try to lump them all into like one category isn't. It's like disingenuous in a certain way, and I do that as a person that makes horror. So like I've been trying to come up with ways to like better describe, and so there's a lot of dark themes in our games, and there's moments that will scare you and disturb you. We have a lot of games that like aren't slouches when it comes to the scariness of it, but there are ways to scare someone without like it's like the difference. I love Outlast, but like Outlast 2 starts with a pile of like dead syphilis babies. And it's like, all right, well the stakes are here, like where are we gonna go? But Outlast is doing its thing. And I'm not shit talking Outlast. It does its thing really well. It's just not the same thing that we're doing. So the fact that we're like kind of in the same genre is a little bit weird, because it's like comparing Splatoon to Call of Duty. They're both technically shooters.
I describe us as like there's like Wes Craven and John Carpenter, and like I think we're more Del Toro and Tim Burton.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We're not quite R.L. Stein level of completely camp. It's something that we like, but like, you know, it's more of the Crimson Peak level, which is so funny because people say Crimson Peak isn't a horror movie, and I watch it and I'm like, it's got blood ghosts. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, it's a Victorian love drama. Can't it be both?
Labyrinth. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll get to the questions in a second. One thing that I also wanted to kind of clarify or elaborate on, like, as both of you were saying, like, there's these different degrees of horror. And I'm glad you mentioned Puppet Combo, because I just recently played one of their games, and there is such that very wide line in terms of horror design. Like, the Puppet Combo games, they are not easy games to play at all. I've watched a few people play, like, Nun Massacre. I'm like, no, like, that game would just be way too intense, especially for, like, people in my age. I'm sure I would, like, scare a few people out there. And kind of like we were saying earlier about one of, like, the hallmarks of horror is that mysterious factor to it. That's one of the things I think is very fascinating, because, as you said, when it comes to horror, a lot of it is about what you don't tell somebody.
Right.
And one of the challenges, I think, like, kind of what helps indie horror these days, is that these games aren't meant to be 8 to 10 hour experiences. They're meant to be, like, 10 minutes, maybe an hour at most. So before kind of, like, the mystique wears off, you can really hit the player with that. And I think one of the challenges that we see from a lot of horror developers, at least in the AAA space, is the idea of, it needs to be at least a 10-hour horror game or a 5-hour game. And it's very hard, I feel, to maintain that level. You mentioned Outlast. Like, Outlast 2, again, like, the stuff that's in that game we probably couldn't discuss in this stream. And it's like, okay, you're starting there. Now what do you do? Like, how do you elevate it beyond, like, that intro?
Yeah. Yeah, and it turns out that you do it by pickaxing someone in the groin.
Yeah.
And that's Outlast 2.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it just keeps going. It's, yeah. You know, there are certainly games that will appeal to different audiences differently, and some that go all in on the horror. For what it's worth, Puppet Combo definitely goes all in with each of his games, and I respect that. I think that he's grown a very sizable audience for that kind of level of intensity that he's kind of cultivated, and, you know, bully for that. And I think that's really cool. You know, but it is, like I was saying before, it is such a wide market that, like, oftentimes someone will be like, oh, why would I play this when I can play a Puppet Combo game? And I'm like, we do make completely different games, you know? Like, anyways, yeah.
Okay.
That was my take on that.
And as a quick time check, I know we have about 30 minutes just about there before you guys have to go, or for both of you. Before we get to the questions, which may actually take us to time, there's one thing that I want to ask. This is something that Star brought up just before, because I know people have asked about this. And that's kind of like the pricing and kind of the production side of the Drax Collection. So, for people watching, how do you kind of, like, organize things from a monetary standpoint? Like, how do you kind of set things up for payment and, you know, do things along these lines? Because, as you said, like, these games are normally, like, maybe, like, a very low price if we were to sell them separately. So how do you organize things along those lines for, like, any developers or people interested in watching?
Do you want to do it, or do you want me to do it?
I could go so many different kinds of answers to this. I mean, from my perspective, you know, I came in when the release day. I'm still laughing at the fact that, like, Ted and Patrick, like, interviewed me on the same day that they released the game. And I'm like, what? You know, I actually thought you were joking, Ted. I was like,
no,
I'm like, you didn't release a game today. Why would you interview me on it? Like, and it was true, which is great. But yeah, they already set a price point, and it's like, we were new, you know, I'm guessing because, like, they were a new company. Nobody heard of, like, Dread XP yet. You know, they hadn't built the brand. And so they priced the game for what they thought was appropriate at the time, comparing it to other horror games that were out, because we still want to, like, pay the devs, but also, you know, like, make sure we're not, you know, putting our best foot forward. And that kind of set the precedent for the rest of the games and how we price them. And the reason why we priced the games a little bit higher, which there was quite a few, like, discussion between Ted, Patrick, and I, was like the quality was just better. The quality for this last game was just like we put so much work into it and it's there. So it just makes more sense to up the price. But I will say that for our full games that we're going to do outside of the collections will be more expensive because we are spending more time on them.
Yeah, those are like bigger, like those are like full games. So
yeah.
Personally, we do think our games are underpriced. We think the quality of our games are better than what the price is, but we also understand the horror audience and their expectations.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like you said, like this is like a good 2 to 3 hour long discussion, and we really wanted to sit down. And as I said earlier, if both of you are free in the future, I am more than happy to have you back on for a part 2 or even a part 3 discussion, because there is certainly a lot to talk about when it comes to the indie horror market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the price point that we land at, we try to go with something that we feel will be, for the amount of hours that you can put into the game, worthwhile. I think that like in terms of like each individual game being like released individually, I think that we're well above like the line of what value someone would be getting for buying each of these games for like $2, and I do think that each of the games are at least worth a few bucks each. And we really elevate it too with like the launcher being its own kind of story and game in and of itself, with this overarching narrative, and then just from the ability to like sample a bunch of different stuff, and to see all these different things. So we wanted to go with a price point that we felt was fair for the consumer. And in terms of the paying the devs and things like that, everyone gets paid up front, flat rate based on amount of time. And then all the developers get an equal split. That was really important to us, is that all the developers get paid equally. Doesn't matter if you're the little guy coming in, kind of our wild card, because we usually do try to pick like one wild card in each collection, or the big ones. So, like David Szymanski gets the same amount of money that Torpilduke did. And Torpilduke, when we picked him up, had 88 followers on Twitter. Really, no one knew about him. Has really grown into being a great developer, super awesome guy to work with. But that kind of ethos was really important to me. So on that side of things, everyone gets paid the same, because we're kind of all in this together. And one of the things is that when we were looking at other models for development, especially why game jams haven't there's a lot of games that come out in a game jam, and generally all the eyes are fighting for that like top 3 spot or whatever, whatever gets rated as best of the jam. So there's an inherent competition there. Like you're not working with your fellow developers to try to promote. You're trying to beat them out. And because everyone gets equal cuts of the collection, there's no incentive to like undercut someone. Everyone's working together. So we've had really great collaborations, between the devs. When one of them's having some troubles, another one will help out. And we've had devs that stick around after the collection's done just to hang out and help other devs because of that collaborative mindset. And, we all sink and swim together, whenever a new collection comes out, the previous ones, when they sell, everyone makes money off of it. So, yeah.
All right. Yep, definitely great to hear about that. And like I said, I'm trying to keep things focused, but there's so many questions bubbling in my head. So let's get to the questions and comments from chat, and then we'll kind of see where things go in terms of time afterwards. Like I said, this may actually take us all the way to our time, but we'll see. So the first thing from Cleveland Mosher asks, how are you both so cool? Does it come easy, or are you just naturally awesome?
So Cleveland does our key art for our games, which is amazing. Everyone loves the art. And he also is the head of our QA. So we think Cleveland is cool too. That's my answer. Even it's funny because Ted and I are so different personalities, and but we all seem to work together really well.
All right. One in chat asks Ted, which are your top Japanese horror films? And then Jackson followed with just top horror films.
There's a Japanese horror director that made a movie called Noroi the Curse. He's really good. He's a found footage director. Let me look up his name real quick. Koji Shiraishi. I really like his stuff. It's really low budget, and there's some stuff in there I would not recommend to anyone. There's some really, really edgy stuff that he does. But films like Noroi, Occult, he made some really interesting found footage films. I really like those. In other J horror that I really like, God, everyone's gonna hate me because I wasn't really a big fan of the Japanese version of The Ring, or The Grudge. Trying to think, Nightmare Detective, I was a big fan of. I really liked. I'm not as much of a fan of like the Japanese extreme films, like Ichi the Killer or things like that. I mean, I've seen them.
Same.
But I would say that, like, in terms of, I mean, if you're specifically asking about J horror, then yeah, I really like Koji Shiraishi. But if we're going to expand it more towards like other like Asian horror with like Korean horror and things like that, I'm a really big fan of like Old Boy and I Saw the Devil. Those films are really, really, really fantastic.
Yeah.
And in terms of Chinese cinema, I really liked The Meg. And I liked Great Wall with Matt Damon, where he fights monsters.
Oh, I love that too! No one's ever heard of that, but that movie's
It's the world's
so good.
dumbest movie, but then again, I got to watch like color ninjas fighting giant, good. The Skull Crushers from the Skull Eaters from Kong Skull Island on the Great Wall of China, and I don't know, it's just fun.
Have you seen The Wailing?
I have seen The Wailing. That's a good one too.
I love The Wailing.
I've seen a lot of films, so when anyone asks me to like think of things off the top of my head, I'm like, I'm not scrolling through 10 and trying to figure out the best. I'm scrolling through like 1,000 in my head and trying to figure out what I like the best. But what is another one that came out recently? One Cut of the Dead is really good. I really liked Peninsula, the new Train to Busan movie. Everyone hated it, and I watched it, and I was like, this is basically Escape. So, like, Escape from New York to Escape from LA. Escape from LA, completely different movie than Escape from New York. Peninsula is the Escape from LA of the Train to Busan franchise. It is, like, flat stupid. Like, there's a scene where, like, a kid is, like, driving an RC car, and the zombies are chasing it while they're doing, like, a Mad Max-style car chase. I'm like, oh, this is just children's theater. But, like, it's super fun. So, whatever.
And like what you said about going through your horror list, like when someone asks me what my favorite video game is, I've played like over like several thousand games at this point. Like I don't even remember. I think I've forgotten more than I've played. Shumbler, hopefully I didn't butcher that too much, asked, I know Drax Collection 2 had a very open theme of Lovecrafting, where Drax Collection The Hunt was very focused with its FPS theme. How does the varying scope of themes affect producing the collections?
Oh,
it's a big question.
Well, yeah. Okay. So here's part of our process that we didn't talk about. We don't tell the devs what to make. Like, okay, so what's really appealing about working with us is like, besides the fact that we like pay up front, is that, and we don't take up too much of their time. Like, it's not like a 5-year dev cycle like other games are. But the developers come to us with the pitches. So we give them the themes and then we let them kind of do whatever it is they want to a certain degree. Like there are certain things that we're like, no, you can't put this in your game. But most things we're just like, sure, this sounds great. Go make it, So it's more, we do the themes and the launcher, the hubs, I should say hub world, not just launcher. But they are the ones who control like the individual games and how they want to do that. And we believe that makes people like more motivated to make something, like cool, because we're not just like, do your game the way we say it. No, they do the way that they want to do it. And then we support them and their vision. So.
Yeah. And when it comes to selecting the themes, like the first one was basically the first collection's theme was make the playable teaser for the game. Your dreams, kind of like PT never really became Silent Hills. So we wanted to do PTs for games. So basically games that were their own thing, because PT was its own thing. It wasn't like Silent Hills wasn't just going to be like a bigger version of PT. Like PT was its own thing. So we wanted to make games that were like their own thing that could then hint at being larger worlds. Like the original plan wasn't to then make those into larger worlds, but who knows? Maybe. In terms of the other collections, Lovecrafting was the second collection, and I did that mostly because I wanted to see what would happen. Like, so the theme of the second collection was already decided on when we brought Star on. Otherwise, it would have been more of it would have been less roughshod of a concept. But like when I came up with it, I was like, Lovecraftian. What about Lovecrafting? So let's see what happens if like so. Then that's where we got Sucker for Love, the Lovecraft visual novel that did really really well, and they were making it into a full game, and we're really excited for everyone to see more of that. One of I would say it's a house favorite. Sucker for Love. Really really Akabaka, the guy that made that, amazing guy. And then for the third collection, like I said, we wanted to go with we went with Spoopy as the theme, which is cute and spooky. Just basically to bring more variety. We were going with a lot of haunted PS1 devs for that one, and we figured that was something that is like doable within that wheelhouse. And then for the hunt, when we decided to change for a more mechanical focus, it was because we wanted to up the production quality across the board. And so as a result, we wanted to make sure that players knew kind of what to expect from all the games. And it's easier to expect, as you said earlier in the podcast, for a genre like shooters, I'm going to be shooting a thing. Horror, all over the place. So we wanted to give something that people could like have a little bit more expectation of. So that was kind of our thought behind the selection of the themes. Plus, with the fourth collection, we wanted to do. We were working with David Szymanski on that. It was wonderful to work with, and he knows a lot about shooter design, so he was kind of integral in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's very fascinating what you said about how you don't really give the developers a hard limit on what they can and can't make for the collections, and it's kind of all then put through the hub and that kind of design. I definitely want to ask more about that, but I know we certainly don't have the time to get into that one today. Another question from Patrick. They ask, it feels like horror movies are now more mainstream today as opposed to 10 years ago. Why do you think in this case that horror games are slower to catch up with this dedicated audience?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Patrick said, it feels like horror movies are now more mainstream today as opposed to 10 years ago. Why do you think that horror games are slower to catch up to this dedicated audience?
That's a good question. I think that horror in general is largely eclipsed by the main franchises, and I think that horror films have gone through a cycle where there was a lot of really popular franchises that have since kind of tanked. Not tanked, but no one's really happy with how Terminator Dark Fate did. Mm-hmm. Or, Paranormal Activities, there was a certain point where the return on investment wasn't nearly as high anymore, I just think that the gaming cycle is at a different spot than the film cycle is right now. I mean, and I do think that horror games are becoming more and more mainstream. I mean, Resident Evil is a huge franchise now. Five Nights at Freddy's, really. Yeah. Anyways.
Any thoughts, Star? All right. Let's see. Next question. Oh, I just got to scroll down there. Yeah, a lot came in as we were talking. Trying to get through it here. All gamers are any horror games. Another question. Trial by Fire asks, can you please ask what Ted thinks of Serafixio?
Yeah, Aaron worked on that game. Sup, Aaron? What did I think of Serafaxial? I thought it was great. I think that I really liked the switch that it did in the first level to where the ladies crawling at you and stuff. Very spooky, tight shooter controls. Honestly, that game was interesting because we had to bring Vidas and team on late. There was a bit of a production issue, and so they got brought on late to the collection, and so they had about half the time to make it that everyone else did, and they really knocked it out of the park. So, mad respect to that whole team. Which is Screnshow Gaming, which is Abby, Aaron, who's Trial by Fire, and Vidas Games, which is Vidas Salavegas, I believe is his last name, but he goes by Vidas Tomorrow online. So,
all right. Let's see. Patrick asks, what percentage of all gamers are in the horror games? Do you think this audience will grow over time based on all your amazing work in this space?
My hope is that indie horror does grow to be more of a I don't want to say mainstream thing. I think that indie horror is best when it's allowed to be experimental and agile. So I always think that there's going to be good places for indie horror in and I think if you see like successive things like Haunted PS1, there's always a really really great space for that. And I do think that as people become more and more internet savvy, as like future audiences are more akin to used to looking for things in like smaller storefronts, not just on Steam, indie horror is going to continue to grow. Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's like any indie industry, right? Like it'll grow to a certain point, in which point it's like mainstream, So to say, how big is indie going to get is like until it's no longer indie. So.
Yeah. And that's a discussion for another cast for sure. Let's see. Patrick was saying, Ted, is the outline for your next game on the whiteboard behind you? Can you tell me what it says?
That's all the chores I have to do. I write them down so that they stare at me until I do them.
Let's see. Patrick asks, what is the single best moment in a horror game you can remember, and why do you think it was so memorable?
Memorable moment in a horror game. That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot that really stick with me. I'm going to go with a weird answer here, and I would say the white phosphorus scene in Spec Ops: The Line, which might be a weird answer for a horror game, but I do think that, once you get more into that game, it's definitely a psychological horror. So that one that really sticks with me. And then for a more basic answer, the needle in the eye scene from Dead Space 2.
Let's see. I think Patrick asked a lot of questions. I'm going to get some of the other people because I know we are pushing on time. Will ask curious about what people think about movement speed in horror games. There's a trend of forcing slow movement in horror games to soak up atmosphere, but can a game be fast-paced and atmospheric? I think that's a very interesting point. It kind of goes with kind of the wide scope of horror. Because I've certainly played a lot of horror games that are more, they're more on the walking side of things, and sometimes that gets very distracting to me because I just want to get to the next point. Whereas there's always that line between something that's too action-paced, and then you kind of forget that there is horror. And again, that could be like a 40-minute answer, I think, for the three of us here.
Bloodborne. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that like horror, it's all about the experience that you have, and I think that person mentioned Dusk, and that, and I think like a lot of games can have horror elements to it. Like I mentioned, like Metal Gear has like some horror elements to it, but people don't generally think as a whole the game is like horror. So if it's about the player experience, I'm not necessarily feeling scared or afraid or any of those kind of emotions while I'm going like really fast and I'm super powerful and I'm killing a bunch of dudes like Dynasty Warriors. Like that doesn't feel like horror to me, but it can have like spooky horror elements to it, like monsters and like certain sounds and that sort of thing. So I think if the whole game, if the goal is to make you feel powerful, not necessarily horror. I've asked people about Doom, like if they think Doom is horror, and people who are like hardcore fans of Doom don't necessarily think it's horror. So I guess it's like so subjective up to the person. Yeah, but if I was like, when I would approach making a horror game, I would do it from a more psychological, and thematic than like specifically mechanics.
Yeah, and again, I'm resisting like elaborate on this because I know you have to go in a few minutes, but there is so much about kind of like the power fantasy and like what it means to kind of like go against horror. And Doom is a really good example of like, again, how much thematic and mechanic can really change like how a game is perceived like that. Let's see. Jackson asks, who else from the Watchers worked on the Dread X collections?
From the what?
The Watchers?
I don't know what that is. What's the Watchers?
I don't know. That's what.
Yeah.
Who asked that? I'll look into that.
Jackson DeFrost.
Oh, don't know who Jackson is.
Yeah, let me. I'm not quite sure what you mean by the Watchers. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Let's see. Lazarus asks a question for Star. What advice, tips do you have for folks interacting with the community through a professional lens?
Well, so I actually run another Discord full of professional community people like at Epic Pictures and Xbox and like small indie teams like me. So I've asked like a lot of those people in that Discord, like, how do you do things? Like, how do you talk to people? So that's where I got like a lot of my professional insight. Because it can be very difficult to deal with community because you have a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. And there's some people that have like, they're very good meaning. They want to come into your community and put forth a good impression, but like they end up like accidentally doing the opposite. Like, for example, if somebody is like, some people want to like nitpick our games where they're like, hey, I went to the specific place, I jumped 3 times, I spun around, and
And the game broke.
It froze. Yeah. And I'm like, well, thank you, but we can't like make all the games like perfect. So we have to like, as a developer, we have to pick and choose the things that we fix. As like, like you can't fix, no game's going to be perfect. And so we have to like be choosy of like what problems we solve when it comes to our game. So even though they mean well, like I have to be like, hey, this is cool, but like, if you're going out of your way to break our games, like it's hard for us to get feedback from people that like for example, if like our achievements isn't working or something like that, like that's the feedback that we need to hear, we need to fix that, those sort of things. That like if multiple people are having it, or if it's like game breaking where they walked into a room and like the whole game went dark, like that's so with community you have to also like always have empathy. So even when somebody is like it seems like being aggressive, sometimes they're just having a bad day, so like sometimes we'll have to ask questions first of like, hey, what's going on here, so always like everyone's a human, so you have to think about that. But I will say, like, as a professional who's been doing this for many years, you do also have to have a short leash, because like I'm not going to say who, but I joined a big, before I joined Dread XP, it was like a bigger studio that made a very successful indie game, and they asked me to come to their community, and their biggest problem was they were letting people just say and do whatever in their community, and it was causing a lot of drama. There was a lot of fighting and harassment and bullying, and I was like, they're like, but they're fans of the games, and I'm like, like they're fans of your game, but they're also making your community feel unwelcoming. So I will say that anyone who's like doing community, you have to have like empathy, setting up your rules, expectations. You have to be on it quickly and kind of just like have that short leash, because intuitively we want to like people to like us, so we want to be like super nice, but unfortunately, like, people may be very young or may not like have the social skills to know how to do that.
Few more questions in chat. We'll see when we get through them in the next few minutes. Let's see. I think this one came in from Fatal 13 asks, do you think cosmic horror has become more mainstream?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Again, like things go in trends. So like like Japanese horror wasn't a thing right in the like necessarily the 80s, but like starting in the 90s and the 2000s, Japanese horror started to get more popular, especially with like Hollywood remakes. So same thing with like cosmic horror, and like slashers used to be more popular, but they're not as popular now, except for like obviously Puppet Combo. But like in the most part, like things come and go. Like I said, like survival horror games back in like 2010, I'd say 2016, it was like a whole bunch of survival horror games. But nowadays you see I don't know, more experimental horror games, people trying to do new things, new monsters. Pasta is really popular. Yeah, SCP's gotten more popular.
And I will think I do want to really quick say, like, it is fun that cosmic horror is having this revival and rebranding. There's a lot of issues that people typically bring up with cosmic horror when it comes to the original author, for various different reasons. And I just think it's wonderful that we have the chance to make Sucker for Love, which is, made by an African-American dev who's making sexy Cthulhu girls into a video game. I think that is the greatest reclamation of the genre that that we can do. And I think it's great that the genre has managed to speak to so many people, despite the shortcomings of the original author.
That's true. We talk about that a lot.
Oh yes, I'm sure. Glory Me asks, what are your plans for the next DreadX collection? Do you have anything you can reveal or tease to the people watching?
Why are you looking at me? Don't look at me, Star. We don't have any current. We haven't yet figured out what our current plans are for the next collection. But it'll be fantastic if and when it does happen. If or when.
We are like, I want people to know that like we are working on bigger games.
Mm-hmm.
So like be looking, because like a lot of people also asked us like, are you ever going to make Sucker for Love a full version? And the answer is yes. Like we announced it last October. So like we really want to focus on like the collections were a great base for us to jump on, and we'll probably do more collections, but we also want to do bigger games that people have always also asked for. The problem is like it's not like, are we going to do the thing? It's like we wanted to do too many things, and we have to be very selective of what we choose to do. So Sucker for Love, Spookware full game. We're making a game, Dread Delusion, from the PS1 demo disc.
Oh,
the
nice.
First disc. Yeah, Dread Delusion. And then there is MFN, which is a mystery game that if you follow our channels, you'll learn eventually what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's definitely a topic like there about deciding, which games to expand on and kind of like how to even expand on these. Because as you said, like a lot of these games are built within, a very short time frame. They're meant to be like a short, very experimental design. And then taking that and expanding it into a full game, I think, is a topic in of itself.
Yeah.
Let's see. And I'm glad that both of you brought up Sucker for Love, because I was going to bring that up at some point during this cast as like kind of like the breakout like surprise game from like Dress Collection 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, but
yeah, like you can just tell. Like that's the thing about marketing. So developers come to me and they're like, how do I know I have a game that people are going to care about? It's like you post it on social media, and the likes, the engagement, that will tell you if people are going to buy it, if people care about it, So certain themes, art styles, how you present it. Anime games do well. Like we all know this. We look at Steam algorithm, Sucker for Love is that persona, that developer loves persona. He's a fantastic artist. And it was more than just like a VN, like a typical visual novel. Like it had different horror mechanics to it that like really added like an extra layer to it. That was a happy surprise for a lot of people. And like the developer, and you can tell like the other developers too were really like, whoa, look at this, like they're also really excited. It's just kind of obvious when you market games and you see a bunch of games, like the ones that people are like, initially interested in and kind of like market themselves,
Yeah. And I know we are right at time and still have a few questions coming in, but I guess here's one thing that would be a good one to end on. And like I said, if you're both free, we can certainly talk about after this cast about maybe setting up another time or later on. Karthik, hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly.
Oh, sorry.
They ask, what are like the foundational elements of horror design? And like I guess like that's I think a good like wrapper for us, I guess, to kind of put that into a more bite-sized question. Like, what makes a horror game? Like, what makes horror, I guess, for both of you?
What makes a horror game? Huh?
You can go first.
Okay. What makes a horror game for me? It just has to have the right themes to it, like the spooky mansion, the monsters, the how it unfolds, it presents itself, the pacing of it. It's it is what it's a case-by-case basis of what horror is. And like even if like it's not scary to me, I can still consider certain things horror, because I realize what the artist is trying to portray, right? So something could be a psychological thriller to most people, but if the intention is to make a horror, and I can see, they're trying to make a horror, like Dark Souls is for sure a lot of horrors in that.
And Bloodborne.
Because I remember asking Ted, I'm like there's like I don't see that many horror games at E3, and he's like, there is a lot of horror games at E3, and then I looked at and I was like, oh wait, like zombie games and that sort of thing. I didn't even realize were like actual horror games. And that's because like of our in the game industry, and again, like you go to Steam, horror is not a main genre for games on Steam. Like you have to go through the tags to find horror in it. So it's like considered a subgenre. So, but like at the same time, it has like a massive audience. So it's kind of interesting. Ted, go ahead.
Can you repeat the original question? I'm trying to find it again in chat because I just want to make sure I'm answering it correctly, but I couldn't.
It was like near the bottom. Karthik asked, what are like the foundational elements of horror design?
Foundational elements of horror design, right?
Mm-hmm.
So horror design is largely tied into narrative, because you're basically trying to like plan your beats, like your story beats, and those be the big beats of the scares. So like the fundamental elements, like if I'm saying it, like, so when I design the launchers, right, like there's a certain amount of moments that we know we have the player's attention, and those are generally when they're like completing a puzzle, or when they're coming right back from the games, or they, you know, so those moments that are like, okay, we know that the player is kind of invested and paying attention in this moment, and you can tie your scary moments around those beats, and the beats that you decide to hit and the beats that you decide to don't hit is going to create the cadence for your game. So with the hunt, we wanted to go for something that was more psychological horror, progressive. We didn't want monsters to be jumping out at you every 2 seconds. So with the base, you know, there's a lot of moments where we could have done a scare there, but we decided to do something quieter or more subtle. So that when we do add the scares, it's more pronounced. And there are a bunch of small scares you might not notice, like, you know, a door being opened that you had previously closed, or little things like that that are fun for people to find. But the fundamental core concept of it is let's hit the let's hit those beats that we know are going to be moments where the players are paying attention. There's actually a really great documentary that they did on the original Dead Space that talks a lot about this, because with Dead Space, you know, they never rarely lock you in place. A lot of times the camera is able to be moved basically anywhere. So they're like, how do we make sure a person's looking at that over there when a monster comes out so they get scared? How do we do that? So that should always kind of be your question is, okay, where are the moments that I want to scare the player? Why is this the moment that I'm trying to scare the player? And what are the ways that we are making sure that the player is getting the same experience that we intended? So that's what I would say is the fundamental design question when creating a horror game. So I hope that answers the question.
We don't want, yeah, I'll just say this too. Like, I've played a lot of games of people who I question, like, I'm like, have they played a lot of horror games? Because like sometimes I'll play horror games and it's just like jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, like over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, like you just get used to it and you look for it, and so it's not scary anymore. So it's like that's like some of the things you have to think about when doing design. And also, like, if you're also promoting it as a horror game and there's like a spooky atmosphere but nothing ever happens to you, that's also a problem. So it's like being a good designer means having to balance that out.
Yeah. And no pun intended, but you both are killing me with these topics. I want to elaborate on them, but then we'll be here for like another like 2-3 hours talking about horror design. So I know it's about time, or we're kind of like right past the point of wrapping things up. Anything else regarding the production side, the Drex collection, that we didn't discuss that either of you want to elaborate on, or you know you had a question asked that you want like to fill people in on?
You can go first.
Hold. Sorry, somebody was at my door asking me a question.
That's good.
Okay. I hope you didn't hear that.
No, it's all good. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah, somebody's telling me to feed the dogs. Don't worry about it. Okay. Yeah, what do I want to talk about production? I just want to say that, like, we put a lot of time and care into our games. Like, we hand choose the developers. It's very curated. We listen to their pitches. Almost immediately, Ted and I give feedback. We have a QA team. We do marketing. So the developers, like, they just have to, for that time period, just like really focus on their games. That's up to them for a lot of the things, like scope, for example, the team that they choose for it, who they want to bring on. So it's a balance between like us wanting to give the developers freedom to create their vision, but also us making a commercial product that we're trying to sell to people, because it's very different hobby game dev, which is just like do whatever, doesn't have much consequences, and you can make a lot of fun experimental things with that. And a commercial game dev, which is something like a polished product that fits within our branding. So like we have to be very, and every single collection we have to like continuously like fine tune exactly what that is and get better with quality, and like like how do you improve it, what areas, and of course there always is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I just wanted to because some people are just like, this is just like a game jam and these games get rushed out really quickly, and it's just like, nope, it's a lot of work that we put into it, a lot of hours.
Yeah. Our on the production side of things, like our desire to make smaller projects wasn't like because we wanted to do things hyper cheap. It's not like because we're trying to like cut corners here. There are certain budgetary limitations that we do have, but like the idea behind it was based on a lot of experience that I had with people making short games and being like, that was really cool to work on. I didn't burn out. And then all these stories of developer burnout and stuff like that. And like, okay, how do we create a business model that allow us to create a commercial product without taking several years of someone's life and like months and months of burnout? Because like the tale of the tape for indie games is I worked on this by myself for 6 years and I released it and no one played it and now I'm sad. And that sucks. And so what we wanted to do is like, even if one of the collections doesn't do well, and some have done, better than others, but all have done pretty well. But, even if any one game in the collection isn't the banger that the person creating it thought it would be, because everyone goes into a game thinking that they're going to make something really great, and everyone gives it their all, but every once in a while, like you work on an idea and it just doesn't turn out the way that you thought it would. But it's not a huge burden on the developer because they get to move on, and it's part of this larger package. And I would say that with the polish that we're able to bring, with the QA, with the testing, and with the design insight that we're able to bring, even those ideas that were kind of a little bit like less harder to execute on, we're still able to bring it up to a level of quality that I think that fans enjoy. So that's that's another thing, is like the games that we work on, the IPs for the games are still owned by the individual developers. So like it is very much a collaborative process between us and the developers, and we are very, very developer focused and wanting to make sure the developers have the resources available and the time to do what they need to do, etc.
All right.
I also want to say real quick that our goal is to grow bigger as a horror studio. Like we don't want to make like just small indie games. Like we want the perception of like we make quality games that even if you're not into horror, you still like our games,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you even like jump into horror games, like maybe start with our games and then see what else is in the genre. So like I just want to say that like we are where we are now, but we're also only a year old. We just had our anniversary April 9th. So we're for a year we've done a lot. So like we want to continue to grow and get bigger with not just like the horror genre, but also like within the bigger industry.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's definitely a lot more we can be discussing about horror design, especially about producing these games, but we are definitely past time. So my final question for both of you is, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching to take us out for tonight?
Good.
No, just thanks for watching. It's been really awesome being able to release collections that people like. When we all launched this, I came to the meeting with an air of confidence to get the thing done that I wasn't entirely internally feeling, because I wasn't sure how people would react to this kind of product. But it seems like people really enjoy it, and we love making them, and we just hope to keep delivering content that people love for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add, Star?
It's just you work so hard on something and you can't control how people are going to perceive it. Only like you can guess to a certain degree, but you can't really tell exactly how it was going. And the fact that like we've had so much like love and support, and there's so many people that like get what we're trying to do, it's just so encouraging. And I just want to say thank you so much to anyone who follows us and, you know, has even played one of our games in their collections. Like that means a lot to us. So thank you.
All right. So I think with that, we will wrap things up for tonight. Again, thank you, 10 Star, for coming on, and thank you for the fans and developers who are watching us either live or recorded.
Yeah. Thank you for all joining.
All right. If you wouldn't mind hanging on the call for like 30 seconds after we hang up, I'll just have a few quick postings to go over. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to wrap things up for tonight. And as I said, if both of you are free in the future, I can certainly think of a lot of topics for a part 2 or part 3 discussion, for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. So, for those of you watching, we're going to wrap things up. As always, you'd like to follow me, I am on Twitter at GWBicer. If you're interested in discussing game design and game dev, we have the Game Wisdom Discord channel linked down below. It is open to everybody. And be sure to check out my books on game design, including my 4th book that's focusing on horror that is due out in October of this year. Do either of you have any social media you would like to promote or mention now?
Yeah, Starlight Skies, SKYES. So you can find me. I'm Starlight Skies across Steam, Twitter, Twitch, all those, same thing.
Yeah, we're at DreadXP_. That's important. I'm Dread Henschke on Twitter. I hardly ever tweet. I need to get better about that. But yeah, that's me. I tweet like once in a while. I should be better. I will be better. Star always tells me I need to be better about it. So it's part of my self-improvement plan. It's on the whiteboard. Tweet more.
I need one of those too. Both the social media and the whiteboard.
Yeah. So yeah, you can follow us there. Yeah.
All right. And my final point, for those of you watching, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game or want to just talk game design with me, we are always looking for guests for future shows. So do all the liking, subscribing, all that social media stuff that I need to start telling people to do as well. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where he's in the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, take care.
Bye.
Bye.